We are now officially halfway through the regular season of the NFL. And on tonight's special election night edition of Stat Chasing, we break down how the race is going to shake out over the rest of the season. It's going to come down to turnout, whoever scores the most points in the swing weeks. I've heard that week 17 is all that matters. This is Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally this boys. You're right.
I like how when I have a somewhat questionable cold open, you just kind of let me sit and marinate in it for a little bit before you.
Oh, so what happened there is the internet, it was spotty coming in and out, and I didn't want to cut you short, and so there was a point at the end where you were like, where it was like you were mid sentence, but I hadn't heard the rest. So I'm guessing there was like 2 or 3 seconds where you finished, and then you were like, "Come on!"
I just thought you were more
making it awkward on purpose.
Sit there.
I did make it awkward, but not on purpose. Not this time.
Man, it feels like it's flown by. We're officially over halfway through the NFL season. I mean, this season really feels like it's coming down to: did you draft Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara? And that's about it.
Right.
To Darnell Mooney, one of the other extremely high advance rate players. But those are really the defining players. I mean, really, I think it's the story of those running backs more than anything.
Right. I think there's a lot of noise on Twitter or commentary on Twitter that essentially like an advance rate is just condensed around those guys, and so you either have them or you don't. I think it would be like, it's an unusual season. It has been an unusual season. They're all unusual, but this particularly unusual. It's still like there's something itching at me that like we're not just gonna go quietly into the night of like from week 1 through 17. Did you have Derrick Henry? Yes or no? As like that decides if you win or not. Like I'm oversimplifying, but I don't know. It usually just doesn't work like that.
Well, yeah, especially with the mechanics of the playoff weeks, where it's not just, hey, are you performing really well on average, and you can have a miss here and there, and it doesn't really matter because over a 14-week regular season, if you're crushing, you can take a week off here and there and just kind of rest on your laurels if you're really lapping the field as hard as these guys are. But when it comes down to the money weeks, if you do have one of those down weeks, there's no second chances,
Right.
Advancing.
Right. And they all have a lot of fragility in their points, in the way they score points.
Yeah, it is. I don't know if you saw the running back expected touchdowns chart that Hayden Winks put out, but all of those running backs are running so hot. I mean, Derrick Henry is running like leagues and leagues above expectation. In expected touchdowns. So, and we've seen down weeks for those guys this season. I mean, one of Derrick Henry's worst weeks, almost worst weeks, he then salvages, late in the second half with a big breakaway run. So it's
right.
You definitely can see the path for these guys to have a quiet week, and that could be curtains for these teams. Because, like, if you look at some of the teams that have these running backs on them, there's a lot of them that really aren't much else. Like, I've seen screenshots of teams where it's like, oh, I have Derrick Henry and I have Saquon Barkley, and my wide receivers scored a total between all 3 of my wide receiver starting spots of 22 points this week.
Right. And I have Lamar as well.
Yeah, and I'm ahead by 200, by the way. So,
right. I have Lamar, Saquon, and Derrick Henry, and I just win. And I think like what's interesting, like you think about that in context of like historical things, where I'm trying to think of like just a pure monster season. 2021 Cooper Kupp of just monster evisceration season. But the thing about that season was all of his like usage metrics were like off the charts all year. And that's an example of one where it actually just continued all the way through the playoffs and beyond. But then some other players, like I'm trying to think of, that was his, I think another player was Dalvin Cook 2020. Like I want to say he had like just this monster advance rate and then completely cratered in the playoffs. I'm just trying to like come up with historical parallels where I think to consistently project it all the way through, you do need stronger and I think we can go further into that as part of our conversation, but I think that's important.
Yeah, and I don't really want to. I want to make sure that we're not like framing this as copium for people that didn't draft those running backs because neither of us.
Right. None of this is actionable, and all of it is like, but it's just commentary, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's more like for. I know a lot of the people that are listening. If you're plugged into week 9 of stat chasing on election night, like. You're probably not the people that need to hear this of like, hey, this is a game where we need to think probabilistically and things have a range of outcomes and the way that events occur are not the only way they possibly ever could have occurred. And so,
I mean, everyone needs that reminder. I need that reminder.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I definitely do. So it can be helpful to say it.
Yeah. But viewing things through that lens, it definitely makes it, it gives you a better approach to the game and helps you to have more useful and actionable analysis rather than just, the thing that...
Yeah, maybe the way to use it, sorry, I know I'm interrupting, but maybe the way to use it is like maybe thoughtful fades of those guys when they get really high ownership weeks. Kind of like understand the fragility in some of their projection and maybe that's the way to use this analysis.
Yeah, the other thing that I would point out, because I was just... I've seen a bunch of people talking about like, oh, the big takeaway from this season is that when you get these running backs priced in the dead zone, especially guys who, they moved to good teams. They're older running backs, but they switched to good teams. Then you just have to attack them. And I really like, if you truly were to sit down and come up with a reasonable projection for a range of outcomes for, I think, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley both are pretty, I think, comparable in this exercise. But neither of these guys you're going to be able to project very much passing volume for. Derrick Henry, just because that's never been his bag for his entire career. Saquon, he has a season where he had the really good pass catching chops, but that was his rookie season. And then after that, he never has put up a good by the statistics and peripherals pass catching season. And so you've got two guys where it's pretty unlikely they're going to be super, super effective in the passing game. They're both going to teams that do not use their running backs very much in the passing game. So then you're really looking at the path to these guys absolutely crushing and being the guys you need is they have extreme efficiency on the ground and they're both older players. And that's something that we want to be cautious of, leaning into relying on extreme efficiency from older players, especially ones who have taken a step back in their peripherals like Saquon had. He really had not put up a season with really good efficiency for quite a while. Derrick Henry, I think you definitely could have made the argument of, well, we hadn't seen the guy fall off and he's going to a better situation. So that one I think is probably closer to like a process miss. But even then, even if Derrick Henry got 1,800 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns, which, you would say that's an incredible season, he's still not going to bury you. 1,800 yards and 8 touchdowns still doesn't bury you. You really need like the high double-digit touchdowns to actually bury you. And damn it, that's what he's doing. He's going to go for 2,020 is what it looks like. So when you think about
Derrick Henry is the one where it's like, what's he going to do? Break off a long touchdown just every single week?
Yes.
And it's like, yes, that's what he's going to do.
But if you were to assign a probability of that happening, and like, a way to kind of sanity check your probability for these events is you certainly can use preseason Vegas lines to give you like an approximation of what a median outcome would be, just so you kind of know that your projections are at least sane. And I don't think that putting a single number on a projection is the way to do it. I really think that you need to think probabilistically and have like a range of outcomes that you can assign to these guys. But even then, like, what do you think the probability is of Derrick Henry going for, let's give him an even more reasonable line, over 1,700 yards and 15 touchdowns? I'd say like that's pretty easily less than a 20% outcome, you know? And so like when you think through stuff like that, it's really like, man, it probably is not as big a process miss as it looks like. Like we probably in doing our rankings this offseason, like we probably underestimated the frequency at which those ceilings occur. But we
underestimated his tail outcome, I think, is the way I put it.
Yeah, we might have
misidentified his tail.
And we might have had it as, his tail outcome where he's above 1,700 and 15 touchdowns is only happening 8% of the time. It really happens 12% of the time, which that's a big deal. But when it happens, when you get that outcome in real life and it gets shoved down your throat, it feels like this massive process miss when like probably north of 75, 80% of the time, you're feeling great at this point, having faded those guys, because that's just the most likely outcome is they don't shove it down your throat. And so it's just that it's trying to hold all of those things in your head, even in the face of like, yep, but in this specific outcome, you look really wrong. But I'm really hopeful that the market like overcorrects to that. I think it's going to be hard to really overcorrect too hard, because I think the wide receiver prices are kind of here to stay. But those were just some musings I'd been thinking of.
So I think one thing in the way I'd characterize what happened to Derrick Henry, when I think the learning is, I think what we got wrong is in understanding in the outcomes where Derrick Henry is having a good year for the Titans, for the Ravens, I should say. In those outcomes, the tail outcomes are much further right along the points distribution than what we thought. And so like his chances of hitting those 20 to 25 point a game seasons is much higher because his tail goes much further. And I think maybe like Derrick Henry is like a legendary player, like legendary. And so maybe being too quick to write off a legendary player is a fair comment. But I think maybe like you're saying, he's the one where like just true legendary, a legend, whereas the other ones were just very good, very very very, very good, but not legendary like Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is like one in like 100, one in a million.
Yeah. Well, I think that's enough musings on
the preview. Yeah.
But let's go ahead and get into quarterbacks. I did have a small improvement that I made on this chart this week, Drico.
It looks fantastic.
I fixed a bug with the quarterback rushing and the size of their bubbles. So previously we caught it when Lamar's bubble just kept getting larger and larger. And I was able to find and squash said bug. And now the bubble should be much more reflective of the average rushing yards per game that these quarterbacks have. That's
like a Jim Halpin like prank where he just makes a bubble a little bit bigger every week, but actually it was a bug that was doing it.
By week 14, Lamar literally takes up the entire.
No, there's nothing wrong with this chart. What do you guys mean? We coded it perfectly.
So this week is really interesting. You've got we finally got a decent number of buys. These are some of my favorite weeks for fantasy. You're far enough into the season where there are some injuries that are making you kind of get down a little deeper in the player pool. You've got buys finally hitting, and so again that's thinning out the player pool. You're having to go to more fringe players, and so this is where the real grinders can actually realize some of their edge, where you just know more about a player's profile that some people don't even know the name of, who are going to be playing in contests against you this week. So I'm pretty excited for this week. Unfortunately, one of the games that I am the most excited for is not on the main slate. I mean, this one sets up to be potentially game of the season, and that is the Ravens versus the Bengals. So you get Lamar Jackson, MVP favorite, going against Joe Burrow, who is one of our most efficient pocket passers here.
And the first game already shut out.
First game already shut out. And it feels like the Ravens have been regressing is not the right word, but it feels like they've been getting softer and softer in pass defense with each passing week. So
it's a progressively worse quarterback, just as like carving them up.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm pretty interested in this one. I don't really think there's a ton of actionable takeaways for this game. I just wanted to mention it because it's such an exciting game, but it's going to be on the Showdown slate. And I wish I had like actual stuff to give you for Showdown, but to be perfectly blunt, like my Showdown process involves pushing the buttons for the programs that I've spent a lot of time working on. So it's really not, I'm trusting projections and then for the most part, just clicking button and hopefully printing money. Hasn't been that way so far this season, but I guess the one little takeaway I have for this game, if you want like a little bit of alpha, if you're trying to grind the Showdown slate, is if T. Higgins is out, Mike Gesicki looks like a really incredible play. He just looks like he assumes that role in the offense as the secondary target if Higgins isn't there. And he did quite well with it this week, but we'll talk more about him when we get to the tight end section of the chart.
I just had thought I think maybe with our longer open some of the kind of less actionable stuff, I think we should just kind of like hit it and then move on.
That's a great call. All right, here's an actionable matchup. So we've got the Commanders and the Steelers playing. So you've got Russell Wilson, currently the quarterback. If you watched us for the last season and all this season so far, you'll know that when a guy lives in this spot on the chart, this is like a primo regression spot. You quite simply cannot run this hot forever.
Unless they're very, very good. This is like the Peyton Manning zone.
Yeah, I was going to say there's two guys that would have finished a season here. It's Peyton Manning and Patrick Mahomes when they each had over 50 touchdowns in a season. Those are the only two people that live here. So if you think Russell Wilson is on his way to a season where he's pacing for 50 touchdowns and 5,000 passing yards, then yes, he absolutely can live here. I don't think that's a very reasonable take. Also, the Commanders' pass defense, I know to start the season, we were targeting the Commanders like no tomorrow. They were just this super soft defense. Everyone was going to score 1 million points on them. They've actually gotten a lot better. And then also they just made a trade today at the deadline and got Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, the Commanders' pass defense was already looking strong.
They're a mega run funnel. They're minus 8% pass rate over expected. And then they're like, if you look at their ESPN pass rush stuff, they're 4th in win rate. So I think the Steelers, they're especially with Arthur Smith, like they're going to run the ball. And I this weekend I was in a cabin in the woods, and I didn't have red zone, so I had to like watch one game at a time. And I actually watched the Commanders Giants game, and they like the Giants were just run in the first half anyway. They just ran. Like at a certain point, the stat line for Daniel Jones was 4 completions of 5 attempts, 0 yards, 1 touchdown, and like they were just running the piss out of the ball. First down, second down, and they were getting their first downage. They were getting chewed up. And so I can't imagine a world where Arthur Smith sees that tape and just doesn't establish the shit out of the run. So I think Russell Wilson can't even be a consideration this week in like any format. Like you can't start the guy in redraft. You can't play him anywhere. Like he's completely unstartable.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I pretty much am lockstep with you on all of that analysis. I didn't know you also were off grid this past weekend. I too was off grid and had to figure out a creative way to watch the games and then get caught up once I got back to civilization. But One takeaway or one kind of insight that I had for this matchup is I think that it might also be kind of a trap matchup for Jaden Daniels. Pittsburgh has a pretty good defense, and I really just think that the pace of this game might end up, reducing the total play volume for Washington enough that you just get kind of a ho-hum game for Daniels. I don't want to say that he can't go out there and still have a really good performance, but something like, 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 40 or 50 rushing yards seems like it would probably be a pretty good outcome for him here. And I just think that it's likely that his cost is just going to be too high to justify playing him in what might just be a matchup that gets stuck in the mud because of the Steelers' propensity to want to run anyway. And then you've got Washington, who is a really good matchup for the run.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to score fine with his rushing floor and all that kind of stuff. But outliers happen, but really hard to project a smash week for Jaden Daniels here.
The one where I do want to project a smash week, and I want to just kind of lean into outliers happen, and this is a good spot, and I would like to just take my chances on when the positive outlier game in this spot comes. It's for 1 million points, and that's Brock Purdy. You get the 49ers coming off a bye against quite possibly the best defensive matchup for a quarterback, going against the Buccaneers. You're very likely getting CMC back. And I just think that's an overall massive improvement to the offense. It doesn't even need, to be that CMC is getting a full workload or anything like that. Just having him out there on the field is such a threat to a defense. It's so much for the defense to account for. And I really think that this is a smash spot. It's the highest total game on the main slate. And I had to check Purdy's price because as I was going through and writing up the show notes, I was like, man, if he's at all reasonably priced on DraftKings, I'm probably just going to end up with a stupid amount of Brock Purdy this week. And he's only 6,500 on DraftKings. That is cheaper than Patrick Mahomes versus Denver, which just seems egregious to me. So I'll probably, if I had to guess right now, unless the ownership on Purdy is absurd, I'll probably end up with something like north of 30% on Purdy, which is, I'm usually pretty flat at quarterback. So,
yeah, that makes sense. I don't have much to add. I think Tampa Bay are a decent defense. They're not a particular pass funnel, but I think that the reasons to bet on San Francisco out the bye, Brock Purdy with CMC back are pretty clear, and that all makes sense to me.
The next spot that I thought was a pretty good one for this week is Josh Allen. So he is getting the Colts, and the Colts have definitely been a pass funnel. You've also seen the Bills a little bit more. They're not pass heavy by any means, but Josh Allen is getting enough now to where he can certainly put up very viable fantasy games. You probably get Amari Cooper back this week, I would think, which should be a benefit to them. But this Colts defense looks like a really good spot to attack.
So just looking at some of the Colts stuff, if you look at their pass rate over expected against, they're negative at 8%. And I think some of that is because you had the Green Bay game, you have stuff like that. I do wonder if they're just one of those paper mache defenses where you just get to run whatever play you want successfully. They can't stop it.
Yeah, I think that is probably the most likely thing. I'm looking here in. Let me find this. There's a really good. So this is
if the Bills are rolling, which they should against a really weak defense, that kind of does operate through Josh Allen. I don't know if I would stack him with anybody else other than a running back, but it's a pretty good matchup. Yeah,
that actually is one thing that I want to point out for the draft style format like Dog Bowl on Underdog, Josh Allen gets paired at, I believe, too high a frequency with his pass catchers. Part of it is because of how cheap his pass catchers have been these past couple slates, but he's one of the quarterbacks that gets the highest stacking frequency from all the stuff that I've been tracking. Now, I'm dealing with an incomplete data set. I'm just going off of the drafts that I'm in. But from the rooms that I'm in, Josh Allen gets stacked at a really, really high frequency. And so last week, I was attacking that by playing a lot of Josh Allen, Keon Coleman. Because Keon Coleman and Josh Allen were not being drafted together hardly at all, like less than 25% of the rate that he was being drafted together with other weapons on the Bills. This week, I think the way that I'm going to do it is I'm just going to play a lot of naked Josh Allen. And I'm going to rely on the vast majority of the other Josh Allen teams just willfully drafting a dud on their team and throwing in, Khalil Shakir, who has had a solid role, but he's going to get like 7 targets for -6 air yards and maybe have 10 fantasy points unless he finds a way to fall into the end zone or something. And so I think I really do like just playing it through naked Josh Allen. I did find the stat that I wanted to cite about the Colts being a run funnel here, or excuse me, where is? I
can help you. If you exclude the Dolphins and the Titans, shit, I lost.
Okay, so I've got it here. It's pass funnel defenses by EPA per dropback versus EPA per rush. So the Colts are the 3rd highest, only behind the Jaguars and the Ravens as far as pass funnels go, and they're pretty high up there relative to other defenses. So yeah, they definitely are giving up more by EPA through the air. But yeah, I think really you're correct in that you can do whatever you want against the Colts. So it might just be a situation where the Bills do want to run and they go back to that tendency. And,
right.
And again, you still probably can get there with Josh Allen, but I don't think it's a spot where you really need to have a bringback or a stacking partner with them. Right.
That's kind of my sense as well. And then your next guy was Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I think this is we just talked about pass funnels. The Jaguars are the pass funnel to end all pass funnels. Number 1 in EPA per dropback versus EPA per rush. So, and we saw the Jaguars are just so putrid at defending the pass. I mean, the Eagles didn't really need to pass on them, but it still felt like they kind of did for fun, like
right.
The Devonta Smith touchdown was just like, yeah, we'll throw this one into. And then the game ended up being much closer in final score than it was the entire game. Like that game was a beatdown through and through. And then the Eagles ended up with a mistake late that let the Jaguars back in the game. The game was not particularly close, but the Jags have had a relatively strong rush defense. And I do think that this is a pretty interesting spot for Darnold. The one thing,
and Sam Darnold has been good this year. Like you can see on our chart that he's played well.
Yeah, he's been trending a little bit worse these last few weeks. Like if you go back and look at our charts over the last couple weeks, he's been moving away from the direction that you'd want him to move in. But overall, he has been good. So you're not concerned.
And he has been good even recently. So if you look at week 8 against the Rams, so that's excluding the Colts game. Like, I don't think you can just throw out the Colts game because we just said they're terrible, and he had a bad game against them. He had 9.7 adjusted yards per attempt against in week 8 against the Rams. So to me this feels like more of like an inconsistency, where he's been inconsistent, rather than like a trend downwards.
Okay. Yeah, that's reasonable. And yeah, I'm looking back in week 6, he really, I was just trying to go back a number of weeks. He really hadn't moved all that much on the chart. I know he got a pretty hot start. Yeah, so this is what I'm thinking of. So in week 4, he was much higher. He's almost a full yard higher in adjusted yards per attempt. So he's cooled down a little bit from that really hot start, but he's still been pretty good. So that was really the thing I was worried about. But it sounds like you're not worried at all. You'd be firing him up in the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I just like it feels wrong to me to like ignore like, hey, he was great in week 8, but we just saw him in primetime looking bad. Like, I feel like that's just being that's what makes him a good GPP play. Where people saw him fail last week, will be more hesitant to play him. But we know he definitely 100% has those like better outcomes in his range. I think that's a good GPP play.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Last quarterback that I wanted to talk about here was CJ Stroud, who has definitely been underwhelming based on, I would say, like the expectations of the fantasy community at large heading into the season. I mean, I certainly think part of it is on Stroud, and he hasn't been bad. You know, if you look at, he's in the top right quadrant of the chart. He's doing fine. His volume has been much less than I think we would have desired. But I'm wondering if you think that this matchup against the Lions could be enough to push the Texans here, or the other thing is I'm just concerned that it's two teams that really want to run the ball, and they might just run the ball into each other's faces over and over and over. And then maybe by the time the Lions get out to a big enough lead to really dictate the pass to the Texans, we're just too far into the game, and we're not able to really get a lot out of Stroud. What do you think about this spot?
I think you definitely need Nico back. It can't just be Tank Dell. So I think that's pretty critical. And then I think it was I forget who tweeted this out, but somebody said that essentially the Houston Texans O-line, they've been credited with the most amount of sacks that were unblocked. So they're like or it was either sacks or pressures. So I think it was pressures. So their O-line their pass protection has been really, really bad. Really, really bad. And I think he can. CJ Stroud is like good enough to overcome that in a given game, but I think it really depends on if you get Nico back.
Yeah, I haven't seen an update on what his status is going to be for this week.
It was a perfectly like middling. It was like, hey, we're going to evaluate really, really hard all week, and then we'll make a call.
Wonderful.
So, they're evaluating, unfortunately.
Now, is this where is this game on this slate? I'm it must not be on the main slate.
Houston
trying to find
Texans
it here.
Game. So, it's a Sunday night game.
Thank you. Okay, that makes sense. All right, well, nothing terribly actionable then, because I mean, you're probably not starting Goff or Stroud in a managed league. So yeah, nothing really all that actionable there. My bad for not realizing that wasn't on the main slate.
Then we should move on to the running back.
Yeah, let's get to running backs here.
So yeah, we've got our running back snaps and usage chart, and your kind of first note here was about you had some concern that the mix and snap count went down quite a bit in the kind of like wonky game script with the Jets, a negative game script at some points.
Yeah, you got a lot more Dare. I mean, in the pure pass situations, he is coming off the field, so that's definitely a little bit concerning.
And that's his entire career, even with the Bengals. And then Dare, he's kind of consistently been their passing down back. So if you get a week, I think this is like a very clear example of a game script, like risky back, who's reliant on touchdowns, who's reliant on rushing, or even like first and second down receptions. Those work too, but very game script dependent, and you need the touchdowns to really get there.
Yeah, and so against the Lions, we did talk about this matchup. It could be a little concerning here.
Right? They have a good run defense, and their offense is awesome.
Yeah. The other guy that I had a note here on is Rhamondre. His role looks pretty solid. I mean,
it looks strong. It looks strong. He's their primary pass blocker, so he's their passing down guy. He's their main goal line back. Sometimes being the Patriots' main goal line back doesn't mean shit, because you have to get to the goal line for that to matter. But in weeks where the Patriots are rolling, he's going to look really good.
Yeah, and having Drake May as quarterback certainly is improving the upside case for Rhamondre, because they're actually capable of scoring some touchdowns now, which is fantastic for him. So I think it could be, that he's a little underrated for his role, and especially so when you get a really good matchup for the Patriots. So the ones that I kind of have circled on the Patriots schedule are, you get the Rams in week 11, and then you get the Dolphins in week 12. Both of those are pretty good matchups. So definitely interested in Rhamondre there. I think those are pretty good chances for us to get one of the really exciting, like, true Drake May breakout games where he actually puts up just a monster week, like has a legitimate chance for overall QB1 on the week type performance. So definitely interested there. But this matchup this next week, not super enticing for the Patriots again.
Right. And then your next note here was about Achane, and it was kind of like a request for me to pull up some splits. And so the thing about Achane, if you want to think about with and without Tua. So his kind of snap rate, his useful snap rate, has been pretty consistent. You're looking at something like 50-60% in that range game to game. I think he had a high watermark in this last game, which is definitely encouraging. But the big difference that Tua makes for Achane is that when Tua in Chua's fully healthy games, he has a 30% targets per out run, whereas when Tua hasn't played, it's been 16%. And so I think that's the big difference that you're seeing, where Tua just seems to be very, very good at setting this guy up in the receiving game when they're both on the field together.
Yeah, and would you mind going to the efficiency chart here, because that's the thing that I think I really want to illustrate.
Here it is.
Yeah, if you look at how much expected fantasy points he has from receiving, I mean, the only guy with more is Alvin Kamara, who's just the check down king. The reason I'm so excited for Achane here getting all of these high value touches is because he also is going to be efficient with them, where Kamara has been good. Guy put up 200 scrimmage yards this last week, so you can't really shit on him all that much there. But with Achane, you have that upside of, oh yeah, he could break this for an 80-yard touchdown on every single play. And so you get these high value touches mixed in. You're going to get these outcomes like he gets this last week, where he's scoring like 28 fantasy points. And then the way that you end up with those absolute slate breaking performances is he has a game like he had this week, which if you watch the game, it wasn't like, he had some good plays, but it's not like, oh, it all came on one play. He went ahead and compiled a really solid game with a monster workload. And then the fact that any of those touches can then just all of a sudden add an additional 15 fantasy points, that's how you get the 40 burger. That's how you get the 50 burger from Achane. Like that's how you get the no Achane, no money type of weeks.
Right.
Those are the players that I just want to chase those guys, because we just saw even when he doesn't have that huge, efficiency spike from a single play, he's still putting up like the second best performance on the week.
He's one of their best. He's one of their best players. So he has to be important. He has to be a big part of them scoring points.
Yeah, and I mean, it almost feels like, and I think this is probably more just small sample than anything, but I mean, he's at the very least contending with Tyreek for like the true number one focal point on this offense. I would not be surprised at all if we get like a true Tyreek Hill nuclear game soon here.
Yeah.
But I mean, you certainly could see that it's more of like a 1A 1B situation. And I just kind of thinking of this Dolphins offense as like it's almost positionless between Achane and Hill. Like, of course, like Achane is doing the more traditional running back stuff too, but he's getting a lot of these, he's getting like legitimate wide receiver snaps as well. So it's more like a weapon. It's weapon one, weapon two. It's a little bit more positionless. But I just pulled up this efficiency chart from week 6 just to have some context where I've got the 2 games that Tua played removed. And so I just have the backup quarterback games in here. And Achane's expected receiving points in those games was all the way down at 6. And his efficiency was piss poor. It was like the worst on the chart.
Oh, yeah. People were asking, like, is Achane actually one of the worst running backs in the NFL? Like,
it's like, no, it just turns out that when, the defenses can totally key in on this guy and not have to pay any mind to the passing game, it's really easy to take that threat away. So the fact that you're getting not only like 4 additional expected fantasy points from receiving, and by the way, this chart has a rolling 4-week input for the data. So we've still got 2 weeks in here with the lower, expected fantasy points in there. By the time we get to week 12, week 13, like Achane is going to be above 20 expected fantasy points, and he's going to be above 12 expected receiving points if this trend continues. So he's the guy with, if you made me bet money right now, he would be my odds-on favorite from now through the end of the season, putting up the profile that we need to see for a legitimate legendary season. And that's has to hit all those very specific parameters where you've got the path to 4 receptions per game. You have the path to multiple 2 green zone touches per game, 23 full PPR fantasy points per game. And it's pretty incredible that he's doing it at his size. But he would be my odds-on favorite to finish the back half of the season as a true legendary running back.
Makes sense for sure. The comparison I'd always draw on before this season was kind of like Chris Johnson. He's only 10 pounds lighter than Chris Johnson.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of a decade later when the NFL is smaller. So to me, that's like 10 pounds like feels like the average NFL player is 10 pounds lighter. And that's probably not like the most correct way to think about it, but that's what makes sense to me.
No, I certainly think that's a really good comparison. I have another guy here that I think is kind of an interesting Achane comparison. He still lives on this chart, and he's actually directly below Achane. If you just go down, about 4 expected receiving fantasy points, you'll find the other extremely efficient bubble here, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs, who's doing Achane things this season when he touches the ball, breaking off 73-yard touchdown runs, like looking like one of the most explosive backs in the league. The thing that is interesting is I think that our before the season, perception of Gibbs was more like he's this receiving back, like he's the, he'll probably get less volume than Montgomery, but also the hope was his talent, his raw talent is just going to win out during the season, and the Lions won't be able to help themselves. They'll have to give him more touches than Montgomery, and he'll be the true 1A then, and also he's the guy that gets the passing work.
Right. And it's not even close. That's not even close to what's happening.
Right.
Like he's been. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. The way it shook out this season is he is the passing back, but the Lions aren't involving him as much in the passing game as we would have liked. He's if you see him, he's in the same range as like Austin Eckler, Tyrone Tracy, DeAndre Swift, less involved than Rhamondre Stevenson, Kenneth Walker, like substantially less involved than Achane and Kamara. So, I mean, speaking for myself, I definitely thought he would be right up there and possibly more receiving work than Achane, probably less than Kamara, but again, thought he'd be more efficient. And so I think for me, what I'm going to do is reframe the way I look at Jahmyr Gibbs and just kind of see him as like an Achane type profile from last season, where he's this electric, can hit a home run from anywhere on the field type of runner. He's just very good. He's a complete player. He just happens to have a running back that the coaching staff really likes ahead of him. And I don't think that you can say anything negative even about David Montgomery. He's been very good. So it's just you're going to have to deal with lower workload but really high efficiency type player.
Yeah, and I mean the thing about that is he hasn't even, like, in terms of like passing work, he's like been ahead of Monty, but over the last 4 games, you're looking at a 21% route rate for Gibbs versus a 14% route rate, and that's of a percentage of total plays, not dropbacks. But and it's 14% for Monty. So like he's a little bit ahead in the passing stuff, but not that much. He's at 22% of total team plays or rush attempts to Gibbs, 21% for Monty. And I think what we're seeing, like games where that ping pongs back and forth. It was a low game for Gibbs last week, but he's had games where he's higher as well. But I guess if you look at it in terms of like expected points and stuff like that, you can see it right here. He's 4 points lower than Achane in expected points, so he really has to run hot on efficiency. So you are just not getting first round value there. You that needs to be a 2-3 turn pick for you to feel good about it.
Yeah, well put there. There's a guy I didn't have a note on, but I feel like we have to touch on him. He also was in the thumbnail for this video. That's Chase Brown. He's living kind of right on the borderline of that 10 to 15 and 15 to 20 expected fantasy points band. But, based on the workload that he saw this last week, where he was an absolute bell cow, I believe he was over 80% of the snaps, if I'm not mistaken. Just absolute elite workload. And you get a great matchup. You're going against the Raiders, where the Bengals are huge favorites. Fully expected them to take it to them. But, I mean, that's the thing that you want to see, though, when you get a player like Chase Brown and they get thrust into this opportunity where they get a bell cow workload. Like, all right, can this guy do it? Like, when he gets the workload, can he actually deliver? And Chase Brown smashed. And it's not something where, like, oh, well, Chase Brown's such a small back, he's never going to be able to sustain this workload. Like, this is what he's done this in college. Like, he has a track record of being a bell cow type back. Now, the Bengals did trade for Khalil Herbert today, but I really wouldn't anticipate Khalil Herbert getting any more snaps than Zach Moss. So I think your bottom end outcome for Chase Brown, rest of season, is just back to where he was with Zach Moss in the mix. I truly think that is like your lowest end of the range of outcomes. And then your high end range of outcomes, I don't think you can expect him to get the total number of touches that he got this last week and sustain that through the whole season.
Right, he got 27 rush attempts.
Yeah. I think if you told me Chase Brown averages 20 opportunities, though, from here through the rest of the season, that seems pretty squarely in the range of outcomes. Like that
seems pretty reasonable.
Seems like probably slightly above a median outcome, but like I don't even think you're getting to like upper quartile. Like I think you're probably somewhere between the 50th and 75th percentile outcome to get 20 touches a game. And this is in a good offense. And yeah, I think it's wheels all the way up for Chase Brown. Are you at all concerned about the Khalil Herbert stuff, or how do you read this situation?
I mean, that part is hard. They didn't have to give up a lot for Herbert. But then and the thing about it is like there's no way the Bengals could have said, okay, our plan is our young running back. We're just going to load him up with 30 touches a game every game. What's the problem? Like that can't be the plan. And then he gets injured and you're fucked. So I think there's some chance that he's kind of like they use what's his name, Herbert, as to kind of spell Chase Brown. I think that's a potential outcome, or it could be that they are splitting, let's say, 80% of snaps between them, and you're at somewhere between, you're at like 40% snap rate for each. Like that's probably your low end, but I think that's like a really true, like, Khalil Herbert has to come in and look really good for that to happen. I think you're probably looking at somewhere between 15 and 20 touches a game for Chase Brown, and maybe 10 to 15 for Herbert.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they take a couple weeks to kind of work Herbert up to that eventual
right.
They're mixing in some of their other guys, you know.
They don't trust either of these guys. I don't think they'll trust either of these guys as pass blockers. So it'll be rush attempts and true routes, which that does limit the pie to those guys a little bit. But it would be nuts to me if they didn't favor Chase Brown coming into week 10. Like they have to favor him.
I wanted to ask you about this because I felt the same way, where it's not likely they're going to want to ask Chase Brown to do all of this pass blocking. And him and Khalil Herbert both are not known for being pass blockers. Now, Chase Brown, I just saw some stuff today where he doesn't actually grade out as quite as terrible a pass blocker as his reputation.
They just never ask him to do it.
Right. So I'm wondering, do you think that he sees more pass blocking reps, or do the Bengals find an alternative solution to having their backs pass block? Are they're gonna bring in more tight ends?
They've had Travion in there, and then they've been putting their tight ends in the backfield.
Yeah,
that's what they did last week.
and now you got
a little under the weather.
Oh, no problem. Hope you are feeling better soon. But yeah, I think you get the Eric All ACL tear, and Gesicki isn't much of a blocker. So, you'll probably end up with some random like Drew Sample pass blocking snaps and things like that. But wouldn't expect what they ask of the backs to, be a ton more pass blocking. It certainly will increase because someone's got to do it, but I don't think that's plan A, is to have Chase Brown pass block a ton.
Yeah, it's definitely not plan A. It's not plan B. It's not plan C. They had like two other running backs that were basically just pass blocking, and they gave, I think it was Drew Sample. They gave him a couple of snaps back there too.
The next guy I had a note on this chart was J.K. Dobbins. Had his best game that he's had in a while. I think really the secret to getting J.K. Dobbins a good fantasy game was actually just pass the ball more. The Chargers have trended up in pass rate over the last few weeks. And so all of a sudden you see J.K. Dobbins have a good and much more efficient day. And I think that was kind of the secret. Like, just have the offense do better, and it will be better for J.K. Dobbins. So definitely was encouraging to him. I really think that the Chargers' trend towards the pass is a pretty positive thing for Dobbins. And really, like, you're not actually seeing much of a threat at all from Vidal. And I don't really know if we can expect Edwards back this season. I haven't seen anything on him. So it looks like it's J.K. Dobbins' show, and it looks like the Chargers have finally discovered the forward pass, which I think is an overall pretty good positive for him. Do you have any insight to this J.K. Dobbins and Chargers situation?
Yeah, the only I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. The only thing I'd add is that he's also their primary pass protector. So, them passing more is actually helpful for him because if he's the primary pass protector, then that's his show.
Yeah, that's a good shout as well. Okay, last note on this chart. So James Conner puts up a pretty good game on the ground. He's over 100 rushing yards. I think he was 17 or 18 attempts, something like that. So really solid workload. However, the guy, I mean, like, if you were relying on James Conner to put up a big week in a GPP for you this week, I'm really sorry with how it ran out. The guy gets like flipped upside down and lands on his head at like the 1 yard line. And so he doesn't end up with a touchdown. Loses some work to Trey Benson, and it wasn't just the injury. It wasn't just, and I don't even believe that he got designated with like an injury or anything like that in this game. He just, dude landed on his head. Like, he got a little banged up. But the Benson work came before that. Benson was getting touches early in the game, and he looked much better than he had. Like, Benson has looked not great up to this point in the season. This was the first game I thought that he looked serviceable. And then, of course, you also get the explosive play from Amari DiMercato, where that takes a touchdown away as well. So I'm wondering, are you at all concerned about James Conner's work heading down the stretch here?
So I think that's interesting. So I hadn't realized that Trey Benson had been getting touches prior to the injury, because I'm looking at the splits here and kind of a lot of those kind of like secondary guys, them working in it did seem related to the injury. I don't think we've gotten any news back from the injury, so I guess assuming he's fine, you have to expect that it's still the James Conner show. I think that's kind of what you have to expect. Obviously, concerning that they're playing Trey Benson early. He's looking good. They just saw James Conner get banged up, so maybe they want to protect him a little bit more. I think your base case has to still be James Conner the rest of the way, but you've got a lot more risk in there. Like that's pretty substantial risk, I think.
Yeah. So it looks like he did get checked for a concussion, but he came back into the game after halftime. Doesn't look like anything on the injury report. And Gretsch actually wrote in Stealing Signals this week that the Trey Benson touches were deliberate and came early, and he got he started a drive and got the majority of a drive, and it was after he got the first touches on a drive. So it's not like he was spelling Conner. It's not like Conner had just ripped off.
It was a Trey Benson drive.
Yeah,
that's very different.
Yeah, and now I don't believe that Benson finished that entire drive. I think Conner did come in after a few plays of Benson. But again, it wasn't, hey, I'm just spelling James Conner because he's gassed after a few plays. It was to start the drive out. Here we're giving Trey Benson a crack at it, and he looked good. So definitely a spot to watch. It's one where I'm at least a little bit concerned.
Yeah, you have to be like that. I kind of missed some of this context. And written it off as injury related, but clearly it's not. Like if you look at Trey Benson, so he was at a 25% useful snap rate. Emery DeMarcado, he was at 19%, and then James Conner at 46%. And so if you're telling me that even without the injury and James Conner checking out for a few plays, he's still kind of capped at, let's say, 65% snap rate, like that's definitely a material decline for him. And he's at 46% useful snap rate versus 67, 68, 67 in the last couple of weeks. So 20% useful snap share decline. If you're telling me that's what we should project going forward, or something close to that, yeah, that is a big concern. That is a big concern.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm fully to like this is how it's going to be going forward. It's just I think it's something to watch certainly.
Right, right. But the framing almost seems like more than something to watch, though. Like
Yeah,
that, all of those kind of contextual things kind of feels like, oh, this looks like a material like disimprovement or worsening of his role.
yeah, we're somewhere between something to watch and aren't you worried? Or
Right,
we might already be to aren't you worried? But we're trending in that direction.
right, right. I think that's a good way to put it.
Let's move to the next chart. I've got a couple notes here on some of these running backs. So the first one, man. Okay, so I think let's talk about the Bucs backfield in general. So the Bucs with their receiver injuries do look to still have a pretty functional offense. Even against the Chiefs, like man, they were toe to toe with the Chiefs. Like they definitely could have won that game. I really I wanted to see him take it, but they just couldn't close it out at the end. Rachaad White, it just seems like he is running so absurdly hot on touchdowns. It feels like every game for at least the last 3 games that I remember, there is just a lane so wide you could drive a truck through it when they get Rachaad White a touch in the green zone, and he just gets to waltz into the end zone. So I think a lot of the Rachaad White production is being buoyed by just absurd efficiency. And I don't think it's necessarily efficiency that Rachaad White is generating. And you can kind of see that by the size of his bubble reflected here. He's really not getting a lot of expected fantasy points on the ground. Most of it is coming through the air in the passing game. And then he's got really good efficiency. But that's mostly on the back of just converting touchdowns and getting opportunities for touchdowns. But if you go back and watch the Rachaad White touchdowns, if you gave me a chance at all of them, now you'd have to make me invulnerable. Like I can't like get taken out due to injury after the first NFL tackle, which is what would happen in real life. But if you said that I'm invincible to injury and I got a chance at all of these Rachaad White touchdowns, the ball is magically in my hands and I have the same lane to run through, I think I convert one of them. You know, like there are a couple where he's just got nothing but green grass in front of him. So he's producing the most for fantasy, but I'm definitely not feeling confident about him being an asset I can rely on going forward. And so then that takes me to Bucky Irving. And man, Bucky is like the king of making guys miss. Like my favorite part of a Bucky run is the third missed tackle that he forces. It feels like every run, like you need to have at least 4 guys that are going to get to Bucky because the first 3 are going to miss. The problem is it's very David Montgomery-esque in the way that he makes guys miss. Like I pointed this out while watching the game. I was watching with my wife and I go, man, watch how many missed tackles he forces here. But then just nothing happens afterwards. He's got all this space and he does start to run it upfield, but he's just not that explosive and not that fast. Now, I don't want to poo-poo on Bucky. He's a super fun player to watch, and I want to be excited about him. It might be the toe injury that's hampering him a little bit, but to me, he does not look fast or explosive or anything like that. Super impressive at juking guys out of their socks. It's just not a ton comes from it. So
I think you might have seen one of his worst games for that of the year.
Yeah.
Like he does have a lot of games where he has a lot more yardage than expected. So and he's had big runs. Maybe I don't know. Maybe he just didn't have them in this game. I think the bigger point though is that the Tampa Bay Bucs is a full blown, at least in week 9, was a full blown 3-way committee. With all of these guys' snap counts like pretty limited. Like useful snap count for Rachaad White 36%, 31% for Bucky, 13% Sean Tucker. And like Sean Tucker's snap rate is 13%, but he doesn't none of that is blocking. So him taking like 15% out of the pie and then the other guys having to split that up between them, that does make it pretty tough. And I think that's the bigger kind of issue where, like last game, Rachaad White had just 6.4 expected points. Now, he scored the touchdown, so he ended up with 12 and a half. So, like, that's a usable week. But I agree. I'm concerned about the backfield because, like, I do think that it's just cut too many ways. Like, you can have weeks where one of those guys get there, but it's definitely not an enticing spot.
Yeah, the guys I'm most excited about, I was really excited about Bucky until Todd Bowles came out and said the toe injury is something he's going to deal with for the whole season. Now, I might just be overfitting here, and what I saw against Kansas City, I might be reading too much into and attributing it to the toe sapping some explosiveness or speed, when in reality it was just, dude, this is a really good run defense. Like, of course he's going to look worse here than he has in the past. So maybe I'm just being overly cautious about the toe.
He's had that a couple of weeks as well.
Yeah. The other thing, though, is I'm pretty interested in Sean Tucker. I think you really, like, in a home league, you're not really holding Sean Tucker, but in FFPC, Sean Tucker is the kind of guy that, like, I can very much see the path where you get, okay, Bucky Irving's going to have to miss this game because of the toe, and then they do the hot hand thing, and it just so happens that Sean Tucker is so much the superior runner to Rachaad White that he just basically ices him out for a game, and Rachaad gets some of the passing work that he's always going to have, but you just get Sean Tucker with all the carries. And I mean, he looks like, with the reported athleticism that we had from Sean Tucker, we never got like official numbers on him because of the health stuff around him, around the combine for him. But I mean, he's allegedly a sub 4.3 guy, and he's a big boy too. It's not like he's one of these like sub 200 pounders that's sub 4.3. He's quite large. So I don't know. He's interesting to me, and he definitely seems like one of those guys where we look back on this season, and it's like the Rashad Penny playoff run of a few seasons ago, right? Where it's just like, man, remember when Rashad Penny came out of nowhere and that was just the guy you had to have to win any money that season? So if I had to pick an early, like, really thin bet to be the guy you need in the playoffs, Sean Tucker's a fun one. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, he's definitely like with the value in that overall play. If one of those guys goes down, and then it's a 50-50 split, that becomes very interesting, and he's definitely worth a stash.
I had two more notes here. One of them I'm just going to say very quickly, just so we can move on to the next chart. Cam Akers is now officially the RB2 in Minnesota. He entirely iced out Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler literally did not play an offensive snap, only played on special teams. It is all the way Jover for Ty Chandler, unfortunately. So them's the breaks. All your Ty Chandler best ball shares are very dead, barring
right. And Cam Akers isn't usable either. It's more about
Aaron Jones is just a great pick, and Ty Chandler is dead. The last note I had was Kareem Hunt. And Kareem Hunt, I mean, he's all the way in the bottom right-hand corner, over 20 expected fantasy points a game, and it's all on the ground, baby. Kareem Hunt, let me make sure I do this right. I've got the two-way player comparisons here. He is the Ezekiel Elliott of Kyren Williams. Did I do that right? Yeah.
It's gross, but he's certainly getting the volume. It is what it is. It's disgusting, but the efficiency is fine enough on that kind of volume.
Yeah, he falls forward too. Like he's doing exactly what the Chiefs need. Like for real life football, Kareem Hunt is awesome for the Chiefs. And for fantasy, like the raw nasty volume is perfectly fine. Like
yeah,
it doesn't have to be sexy. He's gonna get there.
Yeah, agreed. So here we have our kind of tight end chart. And then I guess the snap rate kind of or the route rate kind of lines up almost perfectly with fantasy points this year, or projected, or how we projected the fantasy points going forward. I know you had a note that that Grant that's a product of Dallas Goedert missing time. As soon as Dallas Goedert is back, he is back to the bench, back to riding point.
Yeah.
And then your I guess your first note was about Hunter Henry.
Yeah. So I think Hunter Henry is in a, he's got a pretty interesting role. I had a note just about, the cream is rising to the top here on this tight end chart. Like, all these guys at the top are pretty much like the best guys at the position. And then you got Hunter Henry in here kind of sneaking his way in above guys that I'd have ranked above him, week to week, of Evan Ingram and Jake Ferguson. But Hunter Henry is starting to be pretty interesting. To me, the way I'm reading this Patriots offense is Hunter Henry and Demario Douglas are probably the two primary receivers for Drake May. Now, granted, the Patriots matchups have been, their schedule has been pretty rough. And so this week, again, not a great matchup, but next week, week 11 and week 12, both matchups I'm pretty interested in. And with the way that this week is, where it's, it's a pretty thin week with the buys and some injuries, I definitely think you could do worse than a Hunter Henry dart throw. He's probably a guy that I'll end up with a decent amount of in dog bowl drafts, just because he'll probably be free, and I think he's perfectly fine for that price. The next guy I had a note on was Theo Johnson, who is flashing a little bit, climbing up the chart here. 8.6 ADOT, 15% targets per route run. It's going to be hard prying volume away from Malik Neighbors, and also it's going to be hard to put up really relevant fantasy weeks when your team is minus 13% PROE like the Giants were this last week. But Theo Johnson had a really nice athletic catch for a touchdown. Like, he's at the very least like flashing the things that we were excited about.
Hey, 27% targets per run, 81 air yards on 6 targets. Pretty good.
Yeah. He's definitely interesting. And then, did you have anything else to say about Theo, or should I move on to? I think you like this other rookie tight end even more than Theo.
Yeah, I think they're both interesting. The next guy is Jatavian Sanders. Jatavian Sanders. So he's at 25% targets per run last game, and that's that compares to 17% on the full year, and his routes have definitely been ticking up. I guess as the Panthers seem to be coalescing around these kind of young rookies, he's interesting. Like, I think the way I'd put Jatavian is, like, if you need someone to start at tight end, like, he's playable in a tight end spot. I don't think I'd flex him even on FFPC unless, like, you have to be really, really desperate to play Jatavian Sanders in your flex spot. But I think if you, like, let's say George Kittle is your tight end, you don't really have a backup, his bye week is coming up, you can play Jatavian Sanders. I think he's probably not min priced, but on DraftKings, but like as one of those low price tight ends, I think he can work too.
Yeah, he's definitely fun to watch, and yeah, pretty much agree with everything you said there. The last guy I had a note on this chart is Jonnu Smith, and he's definitely been trending up lately. I kind of thought that his increase in usage might stop with Tua got back, because the offense would be more capable of attacking further down the field and not have to rely on, as much like scheme stuff to Jonnu. Turns out they just like utilizing Jonnu. He's had a pretty strong targets per route run recently these last few weeks.
They love checkdowns to Johnny Smith. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem to produce that much, real football wise, but it's been usable for fantasy.
Yeah, he isn't on the field as much as you'd want to be like a really strong play, but I do think that they're going to keep. Looks like they're going to keep getting him pretty consistent targets when he is on the field, and this offense is well designed enough that there's going to be touchdowns to go around. So I like him as like a touchdown upside guy where you can rely on him getting schemed a couple targets in a game. So he's definitely he's on the radar as like a dart throw tight end.
Right. Yeah, agreed. Checking the notes. So I think that wraps us up for the
let's move to the backup chart now.
So backup tight ends. So I mean your note was that Hawk has kind of slowly been worked back in. It's funny that they said no pitch count, full reps right away, and being on the field for 60% of dropbacks coming off an ACL surgery is actually pretty good, but it's just funny how much they just misled us.
Yeah. I think to me, I'm not particularly interested in playing it before I see it in a spot like this.
No.
Because it's different than like the rookies where you're playing it before you see it, where the range of outcomes is so wide and there's just so much unknown, where this feels like it's going to be more of kind of a gradual ramp up. He's going to, week over week get more and more snaps. I think it's going to be hard for them to go, hey, there's 60% snaps TJ Hawkinson this last week. Now it's 100% snaps TJ Hawkinson, and he's the focal point of the offense, double-digit targets. Like, I think it's the kind of thing where we'll probably have a pretty clear ramp up for him. And so it's not something where I feel like I need to play it before I see it, for fear of missing out on the big explosion game. The other guy that I had a note on here was Mike Gesicki. We talked about him briefly earlier. You got a couple factors here. Number one, you get the Eric All ACL tear. So the great Eric All battle of who is more in on Eric All ends with a whimper here. And so now you have Gesicki, who is very clearly going to be their primary receiving tight end. They're still going to mix in Tanner Hudson, and I forget the name of their third tight end, but he'll mix in too. That's kind of what the Bengals do. But Gesicki looks very much like the next man up when T. Higgins is inactive. And
what's interesting is that he only had a 61% route rate in week 9, which that's very surprising given his production. But he still got 6 targets for 90 air yards. So that's like his 24% targets per run, 50 in ADOT. So I think it feels like he's kind of like he's got this specialty niche role in the offense. Like they're only asking him to do exactly the things that Mike Gesicki is good at or reasonable at, and Joe Burrow is good enough for that to actually work out decently for fantasy.
Yeah, if you look at his chart, he has 0 pass blocking snaps on here. They're only having him run routes. He's deeper down the field. He's not just getting like these little rinky-dink targets. They're further down the field. But yeah, he's not going to be a full-time player, but at least they're getting him targets and they're getting him down the field. They're not making him block or anything like that. I'm pulling up. I want to look at his snaps by position, and yeah, Gesicki lines up in the slot far more than he lines up in line, and he lines up out wide just as much or more than he lines up in line. So Mike Gesicki is a tight end in name only. He's not actually a tight end. He's a big slot receiver for them, and so that's really the way that you should treat him and view him. He's a wide receiver that's not going to run all the routes, but he does have a pretty good ADOT and a pretty solid targets per route run.
You remember to note that they were going to make Jermaine Burton like a focal point of the offense.
Yeah.
And then they had to completely change it at the last minute. I wonder if they were like just looking around the room. Mike Gesicki, it's you.
Yeah. It definitely could be. But yeah, I'm into the idea of attacking Gesicki again if you don't have any T. Higgins for this Thursday night game. Now the interesting thing is, like on a showdown slate, you've got this. Mike Gesicki was the chalk tight end this last Sunday too, so it's not like the performance went under the radar. Everyone is aware of the Mike Gesicki chalk eruption, and so if you end up with T out again, I almost wonder if Gesicki is just going to be so chalky that it's hard to even play him. Like I wonder if he'll get to the point where it's bad chalk, and you end up just fading that, and you're relying on...
Right, that's a volatile kind of like usage profile where you hit that top end. And if it's going to be very popular, then you bet the other end of the volatility spectrum.
Yeah, I'm literally just saying this for my benefit right now, but this is just to help me remember when I'm doing my showdown process on Thursday. I don't really want to mess with the Gesicki projection too much, provided it's a reasonable projection. Really what I want to do is I just want to make sure that my fields that I'm using to sim against have a reasonable amount of Gesicki in them, and I think that's reasonable ownership. And then I just want to trust what my sims say on that, and if I end up with a bunch of Gesicki still because the projection is good enough into the ownership, I'll roll with it. And if I end up fading Gesicki, I want to roll with that too. It's something where I don't want to let my dumb human brain try to be like, oh, it's bad chalk, try to get off it. Like, I just want to make sure that my inputs are correct on it, and then I need to trust the process from there. But
makes sense.
All right, we're in the home stretch. We're down to the swing states. Wide receiver charts here.
So you're looking at wide receiver charts. Your first note was kind of a question: does Cooper Kupp have his old role back, or was this game just a product of the Puka ejection? So the biggest thing that every time I look at Cooper Kupp's stats, his ADOT just gets lower and lower and lower, and I don't want to like get too carried away, but I get a tough time coming away with the idea like that this is just a player who's at the end of their career and who's kind of like buoyed by playing with Matt Stafford, who's like a really good quarterback and who will have high volume counts. So he did get 35% targets per run in week 9, but that's on 14 targets with a 5.4 ADOT, and like this ADOT just keeps getting lower and lower. It's tough for me to escape the conclusion that he's just much more limited than he was in the prime of his career. That's still scoring fantasy points, but I think that Puka has to be like the predominant main driver of this offense, passing production.
Yeah, prior to the Puka ejection, Kupp was still leading in targets. So we talked about this last week where we said, the Puka outcome from that first week back for both of them, that wasn't necessarily like this is always the way it's going to be going forward, and there's probably some volatility there. I wish that we had gotten the full game here from Puka so we could have seen it play out. But I'm pretty sure, with the one half that we did get, and he played most of the first half before he got ejected. So with that, we did see it, trending to be a pretty strong Kupp game. I don't think it would have changed a ton in the second half, like maybe a little bit. But I think my takeaway here is I don't want to be overly confident that it is Puka over Kupp or Kupp over Puka.
How many 14 target 5.6 ADOT games can he get? Like
Cooper Kupp, a lot of them. Like any other receiver, like Well, like Malik Neighbors, also a lot of them, like, so in these certain circumstances where like either you're the only show in town, like Malik Neighbors, or you're Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford is your quarterback, like those can happen. I mean, like even Ja'Marr Chase had what, like 11 targets, 27 air yards this week. Is that something like that? So I don't.
Yeah, but Chase has had games where like they've targeted him deep down the field.
Right.
That just hasn't happened for Cooper Kupp this year.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, like, I think that this type of target volume and these types of targets are sustainable for Cooper Kupp. And yes, like when you're getting stuff like that, it's just going to be a lower ceiling than the guys that are like, it's just, while he's still sitting here in the same neighborhood as Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, it's not the same type of ceiling outcome as those guys. Like a Cooper Kupp ceiling is probably like a 30-pointer where he gets 2 touchdowns, 12 catches, and 80 yards or what have you, So I don't know. I'm like, I don't want to look a fantasy point gift horse in the mouth with Cooper Kupp and be like, I can't play you because you're low ADOT. You're just a bunch of targets, low ADOT PPR scam. It's like, yeah, but that can get like, what if we just kind of think of Cooper Kupp as much better, less washed Adam Thielen from the first half of last season, where just like, yeah, like he's just gonna get a bunch of targets and like he'll score a touchdown here and there and he'll accumulate a bunch of yards and like,
yeah, I mean, I guess that's going to happen in games. We're going to get games like this where that just happens. It just is that going to be good? Is that going to be good enough for the Rams over like a 5-6? Like how many? We've got 7 games. We've got 8 games left, so 2 months left to week 17. I think it's fine like to play at a cheap price. But it does seem clear to me that we've had like a clear like worsening of his play.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. The next guy I had a note on was Darnell Mooney, and he's one where I really feel like I've had trouble kind of pegging him down this season and getting a good understanding of the profile and like what is a reasonable range of outcomes for him week over week. Coming into the season, I think most of the people that consume the same content that we consume and think about the game similarly were pretty out on Darnell Mooney, where guy had one good season a couple of years ago, just kind of left him for dead. Moving to the Falcons, where sure he might be the wide receiver 2, but he might end up being the 3rd option behind Pitts and London. It turns out that's not the case. Like he's very clearly the 2nd option in this passing attack. Now, early in the season, where Drake London was having just a little bit of a slow start, just due to the volatility of the passing volume going between all the different options, and I think also kind of a little bit of a weird start for Kirk Cousins, where he's just getting acclimated and coming off the injury. I had then pegged Darnell Mooney and Drake London kind of as like a 1A, 1B in this offense. I don't really think that's accurate either. I think it's pretty clear that Drake London is like, the clear one in the offense. But I think Darnell Mooney is a very competent 2. And, if we kind of think back and just use Kirk Cousins, with the Vikings as kind of a framework to put this in, like he supported 2 very fantasy viable wide receivers, very, very different profile than Adam Thielen as the previous Kirk Cousins wide receiver 2. But I think that the accurate way to look at Darnell Mooney the rest of the season is very viable, kind of lower end wide receiver 2. Do you so
yeah,
I guess is his place on this chart, like, is he a reasonable comparison to like a Devonta Smith or a Devonta Adams? Like, is that reasonable, or is he like a tier below those guys?
I mean, definitely in terms of pedigree, but it's hard to. So you got a guy here, 21% targets per run, 1.9 yards per route run, 12.3 A dot. He's running routes at a like 90. He's in the 95 to 100%. So 97% route share. I think low end wide receiver 2 is a pretty good way to put that. I guess when you compare him to somebody like Devonta Smith, Devonta Smith is somebody where you can just get a game where he takes over in a way that I don't think that's really there for Darnell Mooney. He's more of a guy where he can get there by having a couple big plays, but he's not going to dominate a defense so thoroughly that like it's no. It's really hard to see a week no Mooney, no money. But I think low end wide receiver 2 is pretty good characterization.
We were well on our way to no Mooney, no money this past week. Honestly, I mean, if the Cowboys had been able to be a little bit more competitive and force the issue for the Falcons, where they had to keep passing, like we may well have gotten no Mooney, no money. Now, granted,
right? If you get a defense that can't stop anything.
and off of a Drake London injury, but yes,
right, and they will just simply allow them to throw deep to Darnell Mooney every time. Then, yeah, I guess that'll happen.
So what you're saying is, do they play the Jags at any point in this season? Okay, the last guy I had a note on for this chart. I mean, we have to talk about JSN. Finally, the long-awaited JSN breakout game.
Yeah, and what's most interesting about this game is the actual. If you look at the route chart, it's like and if you look at the A dot, like he had like a 20-yard A dot I forget on a lot of targets, so. Just I guess to characterize, he's gone from like they're only targeting him short to intermediate to like just dominating. Now, be it the Rams defense dominating them deep. That's interesting, and I think some of that has to be that they were like, okay, we need to do this, even though DK Metcalf isn't playing. We need somebody to do that, and so we just have to try this, and it worked really, really well. So I think it's probably harder to project that kind of usage when DK Metcalf comes back, but I would hope that they kind of open up these kind of routes to him in future, where he is running more deeper, and like that kind of like probably makes him harder to cover too, where it's you can't just like say, okay, I'm never gonna have to turn and run with this guy. I can break on everything, where that's not really true. If he's a true threat to catch this deep.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly hope this is a genie out of the bottle moment for Seattle, where they realize that they should just be deploying this guy at all depths. Now, I mean, I want to believe that the breakout is here and he's just going to be, incredible going forward. I think like expecting him to just be that level of dominant going forward is probably a little bit overly optimistic. And I do want to, I just want to rein us in a tiny bit in that it did happen against the Rams. Like the Rams are a pretty poor pass defense. Like, so now, the one thing that does bug me when people try to diminish a performance because it came against a bad defense is, well, what did you want the player to do? What else did you want him to do other than utterly dominate? Like if another receiver where we thought they were, just this elite receiver, if Justin Jefferson had the JSN performance against the Rams, we wouldn't, belittle it because, oh, well, it's the Rams, so it wasn't even that great by Justin Jefferson. Or, if CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase go out there and nuke the Rams, like, we're not taking anything away from them.
Right.
I do want that context of like, hey, it was against a pretty easy defense, but at the same time, I think you gotta take note of this.
Well, I mean, people were worried that this guy was just like a slot short ADOT merchant. That was like a legitimate, like people were like not just worried, putting him into that box, and that's not true. Like he's proven that to be not true. So it's like it has to change the perception.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to see how it shakes out here. I would assume that we're going to get DK Metcalf back before too long, but
right.
Let's see here. So you get they've got the bye here, so you probably get DK back for this 49ers game coming out of the bye. But man, you've got a couple really fun matchups. Then you've got the Cardinals after that 49ers matchup. That's a really, really fun one. The Cardinals love to give up explosive plays. Then you get the Jets. That's a tough one. Followed by the Cardinals again. So the Cardinals twice in 3 weeks. And then, unfortunately, it's three tougher matchups to end the season with Packers, Vikings, Bears. But you do get that really fun stretch with the Cardinals in there twice. So it'll be fun. Definitely one to watch. But let's move on to the next chart here. Couple guys that I've got notes on here. We mentioned this briefly when we were talking about the Dolphins, but I mean Tyreek Hill, like his weighted targets per route run are still fantastic. You know, he's over here in the quadrant of the chart that we want. He's all the way over here with these guys that can put up these big explosive games like Mike Evans, George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins. We just haven't seen the fantasy points come for Tyreek yet this season. Now, granted, he's had 3.5 games with Tua. So when you frame it like that, if we were heading into week 4, and it's like, oh no, Tyreek Hill hasn't dropped a 50 burger yet. Like, no one would be panicking. They'd be like, yeah, he had like 80 yards here and 90 yards here and whatever. But so I'm not all that concerned. I'm hoping that people, forget how incredible the Tyreek Hill true ceiling outcome is. And I think it's just a keep slamming Tyreek Hill until it pays off type of situation.
Right. I mean, the usage is definitely lower than it has been in years past. Like even with Tua, it's been a little lower. Like against the Bills, just 17% targets per run. Now the other games were 25 and 33%. But it's been a little bit lower. I'm still with you where the sample size is so small. And with Tua that can't get too carried away, still should have a heavy prior to like our prior expectation, or heavy lean to our prior expectation. But I think there's like some cause for concern. But I agree with you that you keep playing this.
Yeah. Okay, I have to talk about Quentin Johnston, who put up yet another pretty impressive fantasy week. I saw a stat that's been circulating out there that Quentin Johnston is the player that has gotten the most fantasy points on plays coming from broken coverage this season by a pretty wide margin. And if you watch the game against the Browns, I mean, the play where he has like the long touchdown, there's no one in the zip code, Now, to give Quentin Johnston his flowers, 2023 Quentin Johnston puts that
Just
ball.
drops that.
Yeah, he's looking at a 60-yard touchdown, and it goes to the turf. So his hands, I mean, he hasn't had the drop problems as bad as he had last year. Like, you definitely can give him that credit. But I do not think that this is – I'd be surprised if this is a good player, is all I'm saying. Really, the reason I wanted to talk about Quentin Johnston is to talk about Ladd McConkey, because Ladd McConkey is the guy that actually is like the true one in the offense. I mean, they look like they're in similar parts on the chart, But man, like so much of the Quentin Johnston production has just been like fraudulent broken plays, and Lad McConkey looks like he's the real deal here. And with the pass volume going up for the Chargers, like it really does feel like they've discovered that they can be successful passing the ball. Lad McConkey might be one of those players where he closes the season and is just that classic rookie explosion in the second half of the year. Like, would you be at all surprised if we end up seeing something where like Lad McConkey averages 10 targets a game to close the season out?
Yeah, I'd be pretty surprised.
I mean, what's his targets per route run been these last 4 weeks?
It's been around 22%, 21, 22%.
Okay.
So even with the elevated pass attempts, he's been getting 7, 6, and 7 targets. Whereas last week, Quentin Johnston, he's missed some weeks. So last week he was at 5. Yeah, I mean, like I have the same prior that you do, that Lad McConkey is a lot better than QJ, but I'm not seeing this here in the metrics. I guess what's interesting here is if you look at the first 4 games for Lad McConkey, his targets per run was like 28%. And then when he's been actually producing a little bit more, he's averaged 20%. So it's hard to know how to read that.
I mean, to me, it seems like that's just a function of they were such low pass volume early that it's easy to get some kind of wonky targets per route run numbers, right? Like if you're only throwing 20 passes, like the difference of 1 target is a 5% swing, in targets per route.
Right. Yeah.
So
then as they scale up with 44 dropbacks, he's at 17%. 38 dropbacks, he's at 20%. 34 dropbacks at 22%. Where it's like every week he's getting 6 to 7 targets.
Yeah. Okay. So I was mistaken in thinking that his targets per route run were scaling, but it sounds like it's not scaling as much with the volume increasing. It's getting spread out a little more.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening.
I might just be stubborn here, but I want to bet on the fact that this guy's the best receiver on the team and that he earns more volume going forward.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think it's probably a spot where I'd probably go against the herd a little bit. Like if everybody's just ignoring this kind of like middling usage stats, I'd probably not play him. Like that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Where if everybody panicked a little bit too much about a 4-game sample in a rookie season, I'd probably play into it, especially when we've seen the ceiling that he can put up.
Yeah, I'm pulling up my early rankings for the Dog Bowl, and I want to just give you a couple quick 1v1 straight up. So this week, Lad McConkey or George Pickens?
I'm on the spot. I'd probably Pickens, probably.
Okay, that's how I have it too. Lad McConkey or Josh Downs?
That's pretty close, but probably slight edge to Josh Downs.
Lad McConkey or Cortland Sutton?
I don't want to fly completely blind on Sutton. I don't want to just make it up.
He's been getting pretty good targets per route run.
So yeah, he's like important for their offense, but his QB is like ass, which is not groundbreaking analysis. So he had 10 targets, 122 yards, against the Ravens. So And then 11 targets for 101 yards in the prior game. I think that was the Panthers. So I think that's close as well, but you would do Sutton. I think you'd do Sutton over McConkey.
Okay. I have McConkey over Sutton, and then the last guy I'll ask you about, Terry McLaurin.
Oh, Terry McLaurin, easily.
Okay, even in that Pitt matchup where you might get the slowdown.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think McLaurin is kind of like hitting that kind of star territory, where, yeah, I think that's how I'd have it.
Okay. All right. The next guy had a note on. All right. This is my early kind of flag plant for this week. Like scroll down guy. It's probably more like dog bowl. I haven't looked at the DFS pricing for this guy, but I do really like his quarterback this week. That's Ricky Pearsall. You got the rookie coming off the bye. Now, I reserve the right to change this opinion if you get, Juwan Jennings fully back. It sounds like he'll probably be back, but I wouldn't be surprised, if you get Juwan Jennings with some questionable tags in practice this week, if it's just Ricky Pearsall that's going to be the guy that is getting more opportunities here. But I like this spot a lot here against the Tampa defense. And the 49ers, you just have volatility naturally among their guys. And certainly Ricky Pearsall is the least likely to get there out of George Kittle or Deebo Samuel or Christian McCaffrey. But it wouldn't surprise me if you told me that Ricky Pearsall got there on, 2 random touchdowns. I wouldn't be so surprised.
Yeah. And I think that's might be how it would have to happen. His routes aren't great. In his last week, this was week 8, he had a 7% route run, 71%, not 71% route run, and then just 17% targets per route run, 1.6 yards per route run. I know you have to give heavy deference to the first round draft capital, and the opportunity set here. That's pretty good. All of that is pretty good. But every new week we get of sort of middling peripherals from this guy, the more I'm starting to lean towards the average college production rather than draft capital.
I mean, we've only had 2 weeks since the guy.
Yeah, only 2 weeks. That's true.
After getting shot through the chest,
he got shot, but now we're having week 3 after getting shot in the chest.
But you're week 3 off of a bye, and I mean, even from the first week to the second week, there was pretty substantial improvement for him. The first week, he looked like he was not he was fucking up the timing on some of his routes. He ended up causing one of the interceptions for Purdy because he was just late getting to the spot, and Purdy had to throw it.
And is this the bull case for Purdy for Pearsall?
I'm just saying, from the first game that he played to the second game, there was a lot of improvement, and they didn't go away from him. They didn't say oh, you went out there and totally screwed the pooch the first opportunity we gave you, Rook. The next
they did decrease his route share from 84 to 71. He went from 5 targets to 4 targets. He did go from 21 yards to 38 yards, and from 16% targets per run to 17% targets per run.
That's improvement.
It's better, but you can kind of see what I'm getting at. Where I'm not totally poo-pooing it because you're getting game 3 of a rookie first round receiver. But some of that is kind of I don't think you can ignore it.
Yeah, I mean this week though, you're having to go pretty far in the dumpster to play some of these guys. For example, right. I mean, I think for some of these, I know what you're gonna say. Demario Douglas or Ricky Pearsall?
Oh, I mean that would be Pop Douglas.
Okay. Roma Dunze or Ricky Pearsall?
That's pretty close. I think that's pretty close. But it's totally from the hip.
Yeah. Here's a gross one. Xavier Worthy or Ricky Pearsall?
Again, close. But like that to me, I actually consider them to be very similar. Where first round draft capital, good situation, but they've been bad.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. All right, let's move on to the last chart. We might be able to get out of here in under 2 hours, Drico. The clock is running. We got 10 minutes. The first note I had here, I want to ask you about DeAndre Hopkins. So obviously his route rate is going to improve here over these next couple weeks. He's getting acclimated with the Chiefs. But do you think that this game that he had yesterday was an anomaly? Should we expect the KC pass catchers to rotate week over week with who's getting there? Or are Kelsey and DeAndre Hopkins going to just be the two guys that the passing offense?
I mean, his domination was out of necessity, right? Like, they have some warm bodies out there other than those two guys. So, yeah, I think his route share is going to increase, and I think he's going to dominate in targets.
Yeah,
I feel pretty good about Nuke.
I tend to agree. He's in a pretty good spot. All right. The next note I had here was Cedric Tillman. If you watch this game, you weren't super happy if you had played Cedric Tillman in DFS for the vast majority of the game. But then in typical Jameis Winston fashion, absolute pure garbage time bailout on Cedric Tillman. But I mean, the garbage time stats, they do still count. Those fantasy points, they do spend, Drico. So I don't know. Like, I kind of feel like that is Jameis's MO anyway. Like, if you are in a really crappy game, like, he still gives you a shot to get there in garbage time. So are we discounting this Cedric Tillman performance, or is this just like it doesn't matter how you get there? Like, he still put points in the box?
So if you're looking at this here, he ran a 98% route rate, and then he got 18% targets per run. Because they had 56 dropbacks, that 18% and he ran almost every route. That 18% translated to 10 targets for 75 yards and a 1.36 yards per route run. I mean, you're happy you got the touchdown. I think he's playable, but this is a pretty clear case of just really high volume and gross efficiency. But maybe that's just part of the Jahmyr experience. And the next week, like, you need Jahmyr to play well for Cedric Tillman to play well. You have to be happy with the route rate. I think you have to be a little bit concerned that, or not concerned, but it's hard to play a guy when he's at 18% targets per run, and you combine that with 23% the last week, so 20%. I mean, that Cedric Tillman is the type of guy where the boomers salivate like, why would I take early receivers? I'm going to be able to get a guy like Cedric Tillman on waivers and play him, and he'll get me my 10 points a week. I kind of think that's who he is. He'll probably score touchdowns. He's a big body guy, so like that makes sense. But I'm not over like, and just for like a transparency and being a good podcast, we were pretty excited about these guys last week, and I think I think when you get a game like that, you have to when you have short data, you have to evolve pretty quickly, and I'm evolving to being a lot less interested in it.
Yeah, I think I'm a little more interested than you are in Cedric Tillman specifically. Just I really liked him as a rookie. I drafted a lot of him last year. I liked the profile. I thought that he got kind of lost in the draft process just because of the injury. And
maybe you have a Jahmyr bounce back game, and he's a big part of it. Like that seems reasonable.
Yeah, I'm holding out hope for Cedric Tillman. The one where I'm with you on like, all right, let's move quick is Elijah Moore, where we have more data on this guy where he hasn't done very much. Like there were reasons to be excited about the profile when he first came out, but nothing happened. You get a bunch of targets last week, okay, yardage, then again, like you get the targets this week, but he doesn't do anything with it. And so it's just like that's one where I'm willing to move on a little quicker. Cedric Tillman, though, I still want to leave the light on for.
Should somebody be playing Tillman over Judy?
I think you do. I think the ceiling for Tillman is higher, right? You just have you kind of know what Judy is. Like
you're a little bit more uncertainty.
Yeah. And also, if you just want to be aligned with my brand and just, stand on business that Jerry Jeudy fucking stinks, like that in and of itself is reason to play Cedric Tillman.
But if these guys, if everybody was playing Cedric Tillman, nobody's playing Jerry Jeudy. I'm playing Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah. If it's
the other way around, I'm playing Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, if you told me for certain that no one was going to play Jerry Jeudy and everyone's jamming Cedric Tillman, I'd probably have a little Jerry Jeudy. I still do have to stare at I've got a 5-5-5 team that's pretty good, and has a chance of advancing with CMC on it, which would be one of the few team. There's got to only be a handful of those teams that can advance in a tournament that's that small of a field. But I believe it has Jerry Jeudy on it. And so anytime that I check that team to see how many points back it is, I have to stare at stupid Jerry Jeudy on that roster. I should have stuck with my gut on it. But anyway, yeah, no. I mean, if you maybe handicap it and say who averages more fantasy points from here on out, I still think I give it to Tillman. But it's close. It's way closer than I'm implying. It's much closer than I'm letting on. But I think I'd still lean Tillman. Okay, last guy, then we're done. Can we get this blurb done in under 2 minutes, Strico? Khalil Shakir. So Khalil Shakir, you can kind of see him here. He's the second highest guy as far as fantasy points per game, only below Jawan Jennings. He's been getting a lot of targets lately. Let's see. Last 3 weeks, 7 targets, 9 targets, 7 targets. The snaps have been pretty consistent. The number of snaps he's getting is not really all that different. He's just been getting targeted more lately. The fly in the
Rondale Moore world.
Yeah, the fly in the ointment is he's getting negative ADOT. It's all at the line of scrimmage. It's the stuff they thought was going to be the Dalton Kincaid stuff, and then they realized oh, this guy's not that exciting with the ball in his hands. Let's give it to Khalil Shakir instead. So I don't know. Give me your insight on Khalil Shakir here.
What's interesting here is that he's getting low ADOTs, but his yards per reception is actually solid. In week 7, you've got a 0.7 ADOT, but 9.3 yards per reception. At week 8, 1.9 ADOT, 11.9 yards per reception. And then week 9, negative 0.7, and then 8.3. And so, not that this is a great comparison, but one player that was shoehorned as a bad player or a limited player early in his career because of this was Deebo Samuel, where he had this really low ADOT, but he was actually turning those ADOT throws into good yardage. And I think that's what we're seeing here with Shakir. I think you have to be you get a lot more concerned about that kind of gimmicky usage when you're not actually getting the production. When you're getting the production, like play away. Like last 3 weeks, you're getting an average of like 8 targets a game or 7.5 targets a game. Like you're not jamming that guy. But I wouldn't shy away because of the ADOT when he's still producing anyway.
Yeah, definitely agree. He is like in this week particularly, he's a very reasonable play because of how thin it is. I would, pending the Amari Cooper status, if Cooper is out, I would bet you see just an absolutely absurd rate of Josh Allen being stacked with Khalil Shakir this week.
Right,
yeah,
and then you don't play him.
Yeah, you just probably don't play him. If he's going unplayed, which I highly doubt, given how thin the player pool is this week, then sure, I'm very excited to take my 7 to 9 targets of 0.
Right. If you can get if you can find somebody else, are you going to be able to find somebody else with 8 target projection, in a similar range as him, where he's going?
Let me pull up a couple guys that are going back to back with him. I would say very likely not, but again, it is a pretty thin week, so he might be just kind of.
Yeah, then that's sorry. I know I'm going back and forth, but if that's the case, that's a player who, even though he's getting drafted a lot, would be underpriced.
Khalil Shakir or Jordan Addison?
You do Addison there, I think.
Okay. Khalil Shakir or Calvin Ridley?
Calvin Ridley. You do Calvin Ridley. No question.
Okay. Khalil Shakir or Brian Thomas?
Again, Brian Thomas.
Khalil Shakir or Marvin Harrison?
Marvin Harrison.
Okay, here's one. This has got to be a harder one. You've answered these way too easy. Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, these are all good players.
Okay, Khalil Shakir or DJ Moore?
Ooh, that one is a little bit harder. Where he is a good player too. But the vibes have been like putrid. Who do the Bears play this week?
The Bears play the Patriots.
Yeah, I think that probably is DJ Moore. And now, are these are all guys I'm assuming that are all also 100% drafted?
Yeah, I mean in the dog bowl, yes. Just like, dude, if you're getting down to guys that aren't 100% drafted in the dog bowl, you're talking like Raheem Jarrett, Noah Brown, Cedric Wilson, Kendrick Bourne.
It's not a scroll the F down week in the
Michael Pittman. No, I mean that's the thing. Like, you're scrolling the F down to even find a draftable player in the 6th round. Like Demario Douglas or Khalil Shakir.
No, that one's a little bit more interesting. Let me look up what he's been doing. I think that's pretty close. I think that's a true toss-up.
Okay. All right, those were all the notes that I had. We did end up a little bit over 2 hours, but thank you for sticking with us this evening. We hope that we were able to provide you with a little bit of entertainment and distraction from the election coverage that is going on. I have no idea what's been happening in the last 2 hours, and you know what? I feel great about that, Drico.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
All right, we will see you guys next week. Good luck, everybody.
See you, everybody. Hey, I'm sorry. I kept having to leave. I kept feeling